So imagine a horror story. But in this story, the monster isn't, a vampire hiding out in some gothic castle.
Right, it's not your standard guy with fangs.
Exactly. And it's not a restless spirit with, like, unfinished business either. The monster is actually a grove of whispering willow trees.
Which sounds kind of peaceful at first, but
But it's terrifying. Or, perhaps even more terrifying, the monster is just the fractured, traumatized mind of the protagonist.
yeah, that's the real horror right there.
It totally is. You aren't running from a creature, you're suddenly questioning the actual fabric of reality right beneath your feet.
It's just a completely different mechanism of fear, really. I mean, we are so used to the threat being an anomaly, right?
Like a specific evil thing invading our normal world.
Exactly. But what happens when the safe, normal world is the anomaly? And the universe is actually just this incomprehensible, indifferent void that we, temporarily forgot about.
Ugh, that feeling of profound cosmic dread. And we have one specific early 20th century author to thank for practically perfecting it, honestly. Algernon Blackwood.
Oh, absolutely. The master.
Yeah. I mean, even H.P. Lovecraft, the guy whose name is literally synonymous with cosmic horror, he called Blackwood the absolute and unquestioned master of weird atmosphere.
Which is high praise coming from Lovecraft.
Seriously. So today, for the insanely curious reader, or, maybe the aspiring writer listening right now taking notes, we're doing a deep dive into how Blackwood actually built that atmosphere.
Yeah, we're going to really unpack his major influences. We want to understand how he blended this radical relationship with nature, the British occult revival, early psychoanalysis, and the devastating trauma of a global war.
All into this totally unique brand of horror. So let's unpack this. We have a great stack of sources today.
We do, yeah.
We've got literary criticism by Eugene Thacker. There's this fascinating academic thesis from UBC on Blackwood's proto-modernism, plus historical essays on the occult revival.
And, of course, Blackwood's own stories.
Right. And to understand his writing, we really have to start with his relationship to the natural world. Looking at the biographical essays, it sounds less like a hobby and more like a full-blown rebellion against his upbringing.
Oh, rebellion is the perfect word for it. I mean, Blackwood was born in 1869 into the severely strict Calvinist upper-middle-class home.
Very rigid.
Incredibly rigid. His parents were intensely pious. So every aspect of his early life was structured around strict dogma and, the constant threat of sin.
Wow, that sounds exhausting.
It was suffocating. So to escape that environment, a young Blackwood turned to nature. But he didn't just go for, pleasant afternoon walks in the English countryside.
Right, he took it way further.
He embraced a really dramatic form of animism.
And animism being the belief that everything in nature possesses a spirit or a life force, right?
Yeah, but not just individual spirits. For him, it was a collective, almost overwhelming consciousness.
Like the forest itself is thinking.
Exactly. He truly felt that the natural world was fiercely alive, and that if a person could just, strip away their civilized ego and tune in, some form of communication was actually possible.
That is so intense.
It became the absolute bedrock of his worldview. And in the summer of 1901, he took this canoe trip down the Danube River that directly inspired his 1907 masterpiece.
Ah, The Willows.
Yes, The Willows.
Which is widely considered like one of the greatest supernatural horror stories ever written in the English language.
Without a doubt.
I was reading Eugene Thacker's literary criticism on this story for our deep dive, and what really stands out is how Blackwood sets the scene.
The atmosphere is just so thick.
It really is. So he and his traveling companion enter this region past Vienna called the Sump of these vast, desolate marshes.
Right.
And if you just imagine you're sitting in their little canoe, you're looking at a landscape of shifting sandy islands completely covered in the sea of low willow bushes.
Yeah, Blackwood describes these willows beautifully, but also terrifyingly.
Yeah, they aren't normal trees.
No, they don't have thick, rigid trunks. They're supple. They're constantly swaying in this fierce, unending wind, so the entire plain looks like it's rippling.
Like waves on a vast green ocean.
Exactly.
But the creepy part is they seem to move independently of the wind, too. They whisper, they chatter, and the characters slowly realize that they are trespassing.
And what's fascinating here is how Blackwood creates what Eugene Thacker calls natural horror, as opposed to supernatural horror.
Right, because there are no demons hiding in the bushes waiting to jump out.
Exactly. The environment itself is the terror. It's vast, it's alive, and it's operating on this impersonal, cosmic logic that humans are completely blind to.
It's just a totally different scale.
Yeah, nature in the willows is occulted, meaning it's hiding in plain sight. It's this massive blind spot for humanity.
I really want to make sure we grasp this idea of the impersonal sublime because it's so fundamentally different from like a traditional slasher or a monster story.
It's a completely different kind of dread.
It is. Like, think about the feeling of standing at the very edge of the Grand Canyon, looking down, or being on a small boat facing a massive Category 5 hurricane.
Right, you just feel so small.
Yeah, and it's not that the storm is evil. The storm doesn't hate you. It doesn't want to get you. It is simply vast, it's dynamically alive, and it is utterly, completely indifferent to your existence.
And that indifference is what shrinks the human ego down to absolute zero.
Yes.
I mean, if the monster hates you, it at least acknowledges your importance.
Right.
You matter to it.
You're on its radar.
Exactly. The hurricane doesn't even know you're there. And you see this psychological collapse perfectly in the character of the Swede, the narrator's traveling companion in the story.
Oh man, the Swede. He starts out so normal.
He does. He's introduced as this incredibly pragmatic, down-to-earth guy. He relies entirely on empirical evidence to navigate the world.
But the empirical evidence slowly stops making sense. Like, they wake up and realize the sandy island they camped on is physically shrinking.
The water is just rising without a storm.
Right. And the willows literally seem to be inching closer to their tent while they sleep.
Which is such a deeply unsettling image.
And then they find their canoe has this perfectly sanded down slit in the bottom. They are effectively trapped.
And that's when the Swede just descends into utter paranoia. Not because he sees a ghost, but because the very standard of reality shifts around him.
The rules of the game change.
The laws of physics are actively being rewritten by the environment. The sheer awe of these elemental forces threatens to just, erase them from existence without a second thought.
So Blackwood clearly masters the terror of the external world, right? The indifferent wilderness.
Oh, absolutely.
But think about the era he was living in. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were modernizing so fast. We had trains, telegraphs, the Industrial Revolution.
Right, the world was shrinking.
The external physical map was seemingly being conquered by scientific materialism. So where does the horror move? It has to retreat inward.
It moves into the uncharted wilderness of the human mind and spirit.
Exactly, which triggers this massive cultural eruption of interest in the esoteric, historically known as the British occult revival.
Right, because society was realizing that, okay, science can explain the telegraph, but it can't really explain the soul.
Yeah, there's this huge gap, and Blackwood himself became a prominent member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
Which is wild.
The Golden Dawn! I mean, this was the same legendary secret society that boasted members like the poet W.B. Yeats and the infamous Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, and a lot of people hear Golden Dawn, they picture, people pulling rabbits out of hats or casting Hollywood spells.
Yeah, like Harry Potter stuff.
Exactly. But their brand of magic was intensely psychological. It was about rigorous occult training to negotiate different levels of consciousness.
So it was more of an internal practice.
Totally. The goal was to access hidden realities existing beyond the physical realm, but also deep within the self. And Blackwood took this philosophy and channeled it directly into his most famous character.
Dr. John Silence.
Yes, Dr. John Silence.
Introduced in 1908, I think, he is the psychic doctor.
Such a great title.
It really is. He's this fascinating blend of a private detective, a psychical researcher, and like a proto-psychoanalyst.
Yeah, he takes on these bizarre cases of psychical affliction, patients whose psyches are under spectral possession or who are seemingly facing ancient curses.
And here is where Blackwood's integration of his real-world occult training really shines.
Oh, for sure. Silence doesn't fight monsters with a revolver or a silver bullet. He treats magical curses as psychological symptoms that require this profound, almost surgical form of empathy.
Okay, wait, I gotta push back playfully on this concept of an occult detective for a second.
Okay, go for it.
Because if you think about it, isn't a detective solving crimes with magic basically cheating?
How so?
Well, where is the deduction? If Sherlock Holmes looks at muddy boots to solve a murder, does John Silence just look into a crystal ball, go into a trance and say, oh, the fire elemental did it?
If he did that, the stories wouldn't be nearly as compelling as they are. The brilliance of John Silence is that he doesn't use magic to bypass logic. He expands the definition of logic.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, we have to remember that the fields of psychology and psychoanalysis were just emerging at this time. Freud and Jung were just publishing their foundational works.
Right, it was all brand new science.
Exactly. So Silence operates using a talking cure, much like those early psychoanalysts.
Oh, wow. That is an incredible connection. So he literally just sits with his traumatized, haunted patients and listens.
He listens to their words, yes. But more importantly, he listens to the hesitations, the stammers, the gaps in their memory.
The things they aren't saying.
Exactly. The UBC academic thesis in our source stack points out how silence acts as a narrative reconstructor.
A narrative reconstructor.
Yeah, he pieces together their shattered psyches. Like in one of the stories, a patient is suffering from what appears to be a past life regression into a devil-worshipping cult. He's having these horrific visions.
So silence has to figure out if the cult is real or if the guy is just, losing his mind.
Right. And he determines that the events took place subjectively in the man's own consciousness. It was a hysterical fantasy brought on by extreme stress.
Okay, so it was all in his head.
But the twist Blackwood delivers is that silence also unearths archival records, proving the man actually was a cultist in a previous life, centuries ago.
Wait, really? So it's both. The hallucination is a real psychological breakdown, and it's a real supernatural haunting. They are literally the same thing.
Yes, Blackwood is arguing that a supernatural haunting and a psychological complex are just two different vocabularies describing the exact same phenomenon.
That is brilliant.
He doesn't dismiss the supernatural to champion science. He stretches the borders of science to include the supernatural.
Which leads directly to his fascination with the concept of higher space, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because here's where it gets really interesting. Higher space is essentially the fourth dimension. The idea that there are geometric planes of existence folded into our own that we just can't physically perceive.
That's the premise.
Hmm.
And in the story A Victim of Higher Space, there's a mathematician named Racine Mudge.
Great name.
It is. He studies non-Euclidean geometry so intensely, just staring at these impossible shapes, that his consciousness actually breaks through and expands into the fourth dimension.
But Blackwood doesn't treat this like a Marvel superhero origin story. It's not a superpower for this guy.
No, not at all.
It's described almost like a terminal disease.
Because the human brain simply isn't built to process that level of infinity.
It's too much data.
Way too much. Mudge's mind is constantly open to non-material planes, allowing him to grasp these unfathomable concepts and literally see through physical walls.
Which sounds cool, but
But it threatens to dissolve his physical existence completely. He can barely function in regular society.
so Dr. Silence is called in to help him.
Right. And Silence is so deeply impressed by Mudge's expanded consciousness that he actually hesitates to cure him. Yeah, he admits it seems almost a tragedy to force this man's vast, expanded mind back into the tiny three-dimensional box of normal human life.
It's a perfect example of finding terror and awe in the sheer scale of the universe and the fragility of human perception.
Totally.
But, just as Blackwood is mapping out these esoteric internal worlds, the real world delivers a horror that makes fourth-dimensional math look quaint.
The Great War.
Yes, the First World War shattered European society on every conceivable level, and it profoundly shifted Blackwood's writing.
It really was a hard pivot. We move abruptly from the somewhat ordered Edwardian occultism of Dr. John Silence, where problems can be solved in a quiet study, to the absolute meat grinder of the trenches.
And Blackwood was too old to fight in the trenches himself, but he volunteered anyway.
He did.
He served in military intelligence and later took a role as a Red Cross searcher in France. His job was to literally sit by hospital beds and interview wounded, shell-shocked soldiers, trying to piece together the final moments of missing men.
You'd really have to imagine the emotional toll of that.
Oh, I can't even fathom it.
Day after day, he's sitting with young men whose bodies and minds have just been pulverized by industrial warfare on a scale humanity had never seen before.
He absorbed what he called the undigested horror of those days.
And the medical establishment at the time was completely baffled by shell shock.
Right, they didn't understand PTSD yet.
Not at all. They thought it was physical damage from artillery explosions, or worse, just moral cowardice.
Which is so tragic. The UBC thesis we're pulling from makes such a brilliant point about this era, though.
It really does.
It points out how Blackwood takes this confusing modern medical diagnosis of shell shock and uses it as a new catalyst for mystical experiences in his post-war fiction.
He basically flips the script on trauma.
He essentially asks this terrifying question: what if the trauma of the trenches doesn't just break the mind? What if it actually opens it?
And you see this so vividly in his 1921 story, Confession.
Oh, yeah, with O'Reilly.
Right, the main character, O'Reilly, is a Canadian soldier suffering from profound shell shock.
Mm.
He is experiencing these terrifying, highly disorienting
Yeah.
hallucinations.
But rather than just accepting that he is broken, O'Reilly starts to theorize about the nature of his shock.
He starts analyzing his own breakdown.
Yeah, he wonders if the trauma hasn't created what he calls interstices.
Interstices being cracks or gaps.
Right, cracks between his perception of the outside world and his inner interpretation of it. He feels like the violence has knocked his consciousness out of alignment with standard reality.
I love how you phrased that in the outline earlier with the radio analogy.
Oh, yeah. Let's use that analogy to really visualize what Blackwood is doing here with trauma and mysticism.
That's a great way to explain it.
So think about the normal, healthy human mind as a finely tuned radio receiver, right?
Mm-hmm.
It picks up the standard broadcast of daily life. 3 dimensions, linear time, regular social cues, the physics we all agree on.
The default state.
Exactly. But the trauma of industrial warfare takes that radio and violently smashes it against a concrete wall.
The casing is totally shattered.
The dials are knocked entirely off their tracks. It's broken.
Right.
But because the casing is cracked, and because the internal wiring has been brutally rearranged, the radio starts picking up entirely different frequencies.
Strange, terrifying broadcasts from other dimensions.
Exactly. Frequencies that an unbroken, healthy radio could never access. The damage is the antenna.
That is such a phenomenal way to visualize O'Reilly's experience in confession. He wonders if his symptoms are actually just a new gear his mind has shifted into.
A forced perspective shift.
Yeah, forcing him to see extra-dimensional realities that were always there, but hidden. Blackwood completely erases the boundary between a pathological hallucination and a genuine visionary experience.
It's so unsettling.
And he pushes this boundary even further in the story, The Survivors.
Oh, The Survivors is absolutely devastating.
Right, it really is. The protagonist, Lindstrom, survives a horrific crash, and he's exhibiting textbook symptoms of severe shock.
Like a wildly distorted sense of time.
Right, his memory is fragmented, and he looks around at the people near him and feels this profound detachment, describing them as looking only half alive.
Which feels like a very accurate depiction of survivors' guilt and dissociation, like you're numb.
But the twist completely recontextualizes everything.
Tell him the twist, it's so good.
So Lindstrom eventually strikes up a conversation with a pilot who is supposedly the sole survivor of an airplane crash. And as they talk, the reality of their situation slowly dawns on them.
It's this creeping realization.
It is revealed that neither of them survived. They both actually died in their respective accidents. They are surviving only as ghosts.
Wow. So his feeling of omniscience, his emotional detachment, his distorted sense of time, it isn't psychological trauma.
No.
It's because he has transitioned into a post-mortem state. The line between being deeply traumatized and being literally dead is completely gone.
And by making the narrator an unwitting ghost, Blackwood forces the reader to experience the dislocation of trauma firsthand.
You're tricked into it.
Totally. You thought you were safely reading a psychological profile of a survivor, but the ground drops out from under you. You're actually reading the disjointed thoughts of an apparition.
It forces the reader to inhabit that fractured space.
Which leads us perfectly into the final and maybe most practical piece of this deep dive.
Yes. Because if you're a writer listening to this or just a reader trying to understand how a book makes you feel a certain way, we've talked about all of these concepts.
The indifferent awe of nature, occult psychoanalysis, the shattering impact of trauma.
But how do you actually put that on a page?
It's the ultimate problem of weird fiction, really. How do you use limited human words to describe a reality that fundamentally defies human logic?
Exactly. I mean, if your character's mind has just been cracked open by fourth-dimensional horror or shell shock, you can't just type out, he felt very scared of the multidimensional beings and his timeline was disjointed.
Right. It's incredibly anticlimactic.
It's just boring.
And Blackwood struggled deeply with this limitation. He believed that the English language was simply inadequate for describing the truly alien or the profoundly traumatic.
He actually stated outright, the necessary words have not yet been coined.
Which is such a powerful admission for a writer. So to convey these experiences, he had to attack the structure of the writing itself.
The UBC thesis calls this his grammar of disturbance.
The grammar of disturbance. It's basically a proto-modernist technique.
Right, so when the cosmic horror or the trauma becomes too vast for vocabulary to hold, Blackwood literally fractures the text.
A prime example of this is his 1936 story, Elsewhere and Otherwise.
This one is wild.
The main character is Mantravers, a man who has clearly been altered by the war and his occult studies.
Yeah.
He defies aging like he looks 40, but he's well over 60.
Unsettling right from the start.
And he reveals to the narrator that he has been experimenting with higher consciousness and a fourth-dimensional reality. And then, defying all physics, he just vanishes into thin air, right in front of the narrator's eyes.
When Mantravers later tries to explain this experience to his cousin, trying to articulate nonlinear temporality in higher space, the narrative physically disintegrates.
The timeline of the story starts jumping around non-linearly.
But it's on the actual sentence level where it's truly wild.
Yeah, let's look at the text itself. As Mantravers tries to explain his changed consciousness, the syntax just dissolves.
I'm going to try to read this quote from the source and just listen to how hard it is to get through. Okay, quote, "The past, the future, both are illusions. They are the same. I am there now. I am here now. A changed consciousness, that's the trick, you see, can function in a different time elsewhere and otherwise," unquote.
Wow.
There are just dashes everywhere, M dashes violently interrupting thoughts.
It reads like someone hyperventilating.
Yes, it feels incredibly modern. He is basically using punctuation as a special effect.
That's a great way to describe it.
Like, if you think about modern filmmaking, when a director wants you to feel a character's disorientation, maybe after a bomb goes off or during a severe panic attack, what do?
They distort the image.
Right. They don't just have the character say, "I am dizzy." They deliberately let the camera lens lose focus.
Or they drop the audio out
Oh,
completely.
exactly. And replace it with that high-pitched, ringing tinnitus sound.
Mm.
Blackwood is doing the exact same thing, but with grammar. He lets the audio glitch on the page.
He forces the reader to experience the breakdown of logic in real time. You don't read about the failure of language, you read the failing language itself.
It's an enactment of the horror.
Yes. The nouns and verbs cannot hold the weight of the fourth-dimensional experience, so the sentences literally buckle and snap under the pressure.
It is such a brilliant shortcut to making the reader feel the character's absolute helplessness.
It really is masterful.
So what does this all mean? Let's step back and summarize this incredible journey for the aspiring writer or the curious reader who's stuck with us.
Blackwood provides such a masterful blueprint.
He does. He shows us that you don't need traditional monsters with fangs to build true dread.
No, you can build fear by exposing the impersonal, indifferent awe of the natural world.
You can treat the human mind as an uncharted frontier, right? A place where the boundaries between early psychoanalysis and ancient mystical traditions overlap and blur.
And you can use the shattered lens of extreme trauma to let your characters perceive things they were never meant to see.
And finally, when that horror becomes too vast, too cosmic to comprehend, you let the very structure of your sentences break down.
You show, rather than tell, the absolute limits of human understanding.
It is a profound way to look at storytelling.
It's not about the monster at all. It's about the vulnerability of the mind observing it.
It really is. Which, leaves us with a final lingering thought to mull over.
Always good to leave them thinking.
Right. Blackwood found his interstices, those terrifying cracks in reality, those blind spots in the uncharted, whispering wilderness of the Danube River, and in the devastating psychological trauma of early 20th century warfare.
Right.
But if we look around today, where are the blind spots now?
It's a haunting question.
Yeah.
Because the physical map of the world is completely filled in.
Exactly. If a writer were to create a new grammar of disturbance for the 2020s, what modern frontiers would they use to break the reader's reality?
There are a few terrifying options.
Is it the completely incomprehensible black boxes of artificial intelligence? Like these vast digital minds making decisions we can't trace?
That definitely has that impersonal, sublime feeling to it.
Or maybe it's the profound, isolating nature of our digital realities, where we are simultaneously connected to everyone on the planet but sitting entirely alone in a quiet room.
That's a modern trauma right there.
What is the modern equivalent that a writer could use to crack open the human mind today and let the cosmic horror in? Because out there, somewhere, the willows are still whispering.